Professor Richard Wolff is with us, a Marxist economist. What do you make of Venezuela?
This ought to be good.
It's about to become a socialist dictatorship.
What do you mean about to become? It's been one for years. Look at how long the people have tried to oust Maduro and put his party out of power. Last Sunday they had elections in which Maduro and his party stayed in power, but the company that made the voting machines they use say they have evidence the votes were tampered with. So let's see Richard Wolff try to worm his way around this one.
If you understand the economics rather than beating a political drum, you'll know that Venezuela is one of a handful of countries that has two key facts to it. Number one, it has for the last 50 or 100 years become dependent on one product, in this case, petroleum.
That's just an outright lie. Before Hugo Chavez took power, they were the world's largest exporter of grain, which makes sense considering they have fertile soil in a year-round growing season. Which makes no sense that they're starving today because of the socialist government that's taken over the entire agricultural and food distribution industries. Oh, and Venezuela is also a popular tourist destination. Or at least it was until people started rising up against their horrible socialist government.
And number two, that the price of petroleum over the last few years has fallen by half. Let me finish. That's why Nigeria is in a problem. That's why Saudi Arabia has more economic difficulties than anywhere else.
Really? So how come Canada isn't having these difficulties? They're the third largest exporter of oil after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. Maybe, just maybe, it's because of capitalism. Canada is the 7th freest economy in the world, whereas Saudi Arabia is number 64, Nigeria is number 115, and Venezuela is number 179. And besides, what we're seeing with oil prices is really just a regression to the mean. It's actually bigger than it was through most of the late 80s and the 1990s, adjusted for inflation. What we had was a spike during the years of the War on Terror up through the financial crisis, mimicking prices we saw during the energy crisis of the 1970s. But they're no lower now than they were at a time when the oil industry was booming. Here's why the price of oil matters so much in Venezuela. Because it's no longer used as an industry giving wealth to the people. Chavez nationalized the oil industry to fund his government's social programs. Oil then became 95% of the country's exports. Before, they had good oil exports, but they weren't anywhere near as dependent on them as they became under Chavez and Maduro.
Because the price of oil...
Are they in trouble? Is North Dakota...
Absolutely. It depends on how much you're dependent on that.
It's also dependent on whether or not you can get the ships ready to export the oil, which the Venezuelan government can't even do.
With Hugo Chavez and now with this government, they have tried, and I'm sure they've made lots of mistakes, to change a country that had a tiny core of rich people at the top and a mass of poverty, and to transform that.
Before Chavez took over, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America, and workers in Venezuela had the highest living standards in the continent. It stayed that way for several years after. Then, as always happens with socialism, they started running out of other people's money. Now, people in a country with fertile soil and a year-round growing season have to leave the country to get food and other necessities like toilet paper.
And when you try to do that, it's like making an omelet. You got to break the eggs.
Yeah, that's what the psychopaths always say, isn't it? You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. They never seem to explain what good smashing the cookery is supposed to do.
If you know the history of Venezuela,
116
there were
people are dead that's not breaking eggs.
That's a small amount compared to what was done to the Venezuela people.
You're kidding, right?
He's not kidding. Statism makes people psychopaths, and so extreme forms of statism like socialism make people extreme psychopaths.
It was done to the Venezuela people over 150 years. That's how they got to be the poor country that is causing upset.
They were the richest country in South America until your wonderful socialist government got a hold of it.
Which country in the world is closest to your socialist paradise?
I don't think any of them are.
Which is closest?
I don't think any of them can be ranked like that. It makes no sense to me.
What makes no sense to me is that we have socialist country after socialist country all doing what you say they should do. Some of them, like Greece, were even governed by your students, and you have to keep running away from all of it. There is absolutely nothing that could possibly happen to convince you that socialism is a failure. Your attitude seems to be, if it were real socialism, it wouldn't have failed. That's like saying that ripping that guy's heart out wasn't a real human sacrifice because it didn't rain.
Socialism is a change out of capitalism. It is something that you fight for. You know, like people who lived in slavery for hundreds of years fought to get out of that system. People who lived in feudalism fought to get out of it. And people who live in capitalism are now more and more looking at a system that they think they need to change.
Really? Then how come people build rickety little boats or pay drug cartels to escape from socialist countries and go to more capitalist ones like the US or Switzerland or Canada? How come you don't see people doing this to escape capitalist countries? Capitalism is where people want to be. Socialism is where people want to get away from. That's why you have socialist countries like Venezuela stopping people from getting out, while so many people in the US are worried about people coming in.
I've got 10 seconds. You've got to tell me, what do you think should be the top rate of income tax, federal income tax in America? The top rate, what should it be?
I think we should just go back to what it was in the 50s and 60s when it was 90% and 70%.
Yeah, this is the same old crap that morons like Paul Krugman and Michael Moore say. But the only people who were paying that 91% tax rate were people making over $3.5 million in today's money. It's also telling the government receipts stayed at a fairly constant 18 to 20% of GDP ever since then, even as the top tax rate fell and rose again. In fact, during those high taxes on the rich 1950s, it was at the lowest of that range, just over 17% of GDP. When you look at the actual number of dollars that actually go into the actual treasury, after deductions and loopholes and everything else, the percentage that the rich have paid has steadily gone up. In 1980, the top 20% paid 55% of total receipts. Today, it's about 70%. For the top 1%, it increased from 15% to 30% of total receipts. Although we don't have figures for this going back to the 1950s, the CBO does estimate that the effective tax rate of the top 0.1% in the 1950s was 45%, pretty much the same as it is today. So once again, we see that all that socialists have are sound bites and simplistic figures that fall apart when examined. And they psychopathically write off the human costs of socialist policies as breaking a few eggs. How can any reasonable person take anything that lying scumbags like Richard Wolff say seriously? Hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not hit like and subscribe? And to make sure I can keep producing content, support this channel by becoming a patron. And check out all the other great content here, like this video selected especially for you.